Chapter 4. Karl and Angelique. Growing up, the global atmosphere was thick with tension, like a volatile storm cloud threatening to burst. As the Cold War intensified, the constant specter of nuclear warfare loomed between the two superpowers, the Soviet Union and the United States. These nations' saber-rattling sent shockwaves across the world, creating an ambience of unease and anticipation. Yet paradoxically, while the majority feared the catastrophic consequences of a nuclear conflict, there was also a frenzied race among nations to establish their own nuclear arsenals. To them, possessing nuclear capabilities was akin to having a seat at the table of global politics, a symbol of strength, prestige, and deterrence. The world was caught in a precarious balance. On one hand, the imminent fear of annihilation, and on the other, the allure of power and dominance. This dichotomy shaped international relations, forcing nations to grapple with the question of security versus morality, power versus peace. For young Karl, the broader strokes of global politics were a mere backdrop to his more immediate world. While historic events unfolded on the television screen, his curiosity was fixated on the enigma of the girl in the woods. Each day, as the school bus rumbled past her house, he'd press his face to the window, hoping to catch a fleeting glimpse of her. Why didn't she board the bus? Why didn't she attend his school? These questions played on a loop in his mind. The woods near his home became Karl's refuge, a place of adventure and mystery. And like clockwork, he would spot her, engrossed in her peculiar dance. The rhythmic movements, sometimes repetitive, were unlike anything he'd ever seen. To him, it was as if she was in a world of her own, communicating with the universe in a language he couldn't decipher. Boys and their games, girls and their dances, the world of children was full of wonder and bewilderment. Karl's young heart pulsed with curiosity, not about the ramblings of nuclear threats on TV, but about the enigmatic girl and her secret dance in the woods. From behind the trees, Karl would often steal glances at Angelique, captivated by her spirited movements. The woods, usually a realm of youthful adventures and boyish antics, transformed into a theater of fascination whenever she was around. The way she leapt, twirled, and moved with such freedom, it was like watching a secret dance meant for the forest and its creatures. Every fiber of his being urged him to bridge the distance, to simply call out to her, if not for anything but to know the name of the girl who danced so enchantingly. But as with many things in the world of children, courage often played hide and seek. Every imagined scenario of their first conversation ended with him retreating, cheeks flushed, and words tangled in his throat. Instead, Karl would return to the simpler, familiar joys of the woods, scaling trees or swinging on the sturdy vines. But deep down, between those moments of carefree play, a seed of resolve was sprouting. One day, he promised himself, he would muster the courage to step out from the shadows and meet the girl with the wild, wondrous dance. Throughout the summer, Karl remained hidden, never working up the courage to speak with the mysterious girl. And now today was the day every young boy despised, the first day of a new school year. No more running through the woods all day, climbing trees, fishing in the pond, or playing in the creeks. No, it was all cut down to only the weekends, which seemed so far apart that they would never come. Every morning, Karl's awakening was a small theatrical play, a routine orchestrated by his mother. The familiar tug on his foot was both a gentle admonishment and an affectionate reminder of the day awaiting him. Groggily, he'd grumble his surrender, the words muffled by his pillow, I'm up, expressing the sentiment of countless children roused for school. But this morning was different. The delightful aroma wafting through the house signaled a treat. Pancakes. Energized, Karl bolted to the kitchen, eager to ensure his cherished breakfast was cooked just right, though he felt the need to remind her every time about his preference, golden brown with crispy edges. His mother knew. The familiar dance between them, his earnest requests and her indulgent smiles, had become a cherished ritual. Once the pancakes were served, Karl meticulously applied the syrup. It was an art form, ensuring each pancake was evenly coated, with nary a drop staining his plate. This little quirk, though routine, never failed to elicit a chuckle from his mother, making their mornings a fusion of love, laughter, and little traditions. Every morning, time seemed to play a mischievous game with Karl. Despite the early rousing and the aroma of pancakes, he perpetually found himself racing against the clock. No matter how methodical he tried to be, some step in his routine always managed to throw him off. From the window of his home, he would occasionally catch the glint of the bus's yellow exterior through the dense foliage. Boarding the bus felt more like a chore than an adventure to Karl. He often found himself breaking into a sprint, hoping to catch it in the nick of time. The sound of its roaring engine was usually a signal to start running, and most mornings involved a hasty dash down the driveway, the bus pulling away just as he arrived. But this morning was different. As he climbed aboard, panting slightly, an unexpected sight awaited him. She was there, the girl with the sunlit hair who danced so freely in the woods. Seeing her on the bus felt like a merging of two worlds for Karl. The familiar drudgery of school mornings and the magical enigma of the dancing girl. He knew, from this day on, mornings wouldn't be the same. The race to the bus stop now had another exciting layer, the hope of seeing Angelique, and perhaps, just perhaps, getting to know her a little better. Karl's mind was awash with thoughts of the mysterious girl from the woods. When school was dismissed and he entered the bus, the sight that met his eyes halted him mid-stride. There she was, Angelique, with her familiar visage seated alone. Karl's usual march to the back of the bus, a practiced routine, was suddenly disrupted. The weight of the moment settled in, causing his heart to race and his stomach to flutter with nervous excitement. He stood paralyzed in the aisle, attempting to process the unexpected situation. However, the bus, indifferent to Karl's internal whirlwind, jerked into motion. Unprepared, Karl was caught off balance. Rather than crumpling into a heap on the floor, he instinctively transformed his stumble into a somewhat clumsy roll, landing in the seat directly opposite Angelique. While it wasn't the most graceful entrance, it certainly made for an unforgettable one. "Hi, I am Angelique," she said in the sweetest voice he had ever heard. The rapid thumping in Karl's chest felt deafening even with the bus's ambient noise. With his mind swirling in a vortex of thoughts, the singular realization dawned on him. Angelique. That was her name. His mysterious dancing woodland sprite had a name, and it was Angelique. In a bid to introduce himself, he managed to stammer out, "Karl!" But his confidence wavered, and he quickly averted his gaze, allowing the blur of trees outside the window to distract him. Angelique, unaware of the storm of emotions Karl was experiencing, settled into the rhythm of the bus ride, her thoughts veering towards the anticipation of school. Throughout the day, Karl felt like he was living in some sort of surreal dream. Everywhere he turned, there she was. Angelique was in almost all his classes. This odd alignment of schedules both elated and terrified him. He continually coaxed himself to muster up the courage to speak to her, to initiate a conversation, a connection. But each time, doubt and nervousness shackled him. With every passing class, the weight of his missed opportunities grew heavier. The day was quickly drawing to a close, and Karl knew he was running out of time. The pressure was mounting. It was now or never. Karl's heart sank momentarily as bells rang through the room without any sign of Angelique. But just as he was resigning himself to another missed opportunity, there she was, visible through the frosted glass of the door, standing with Charlotte, the guidance counselor. His pulse quickened again, not just from her sudden appearance, but from the realization that only 2 vacant seats remained. One was directly in front of him, and the other tantalizingly right behind him. The stage was set, but could he summon the courage to act when the moment arrived? Angelique, though new to the school, had been paired with Charlotte to ensure her transition was smooth. Charlotte was a seasoned guidance counselor and had seen many new students come and go. She understood the flood of emotions that could engulf a newcomer and took extra care, especially on the first day. The close of the day was always a challenge. The final bell was like a starting gun, setting off a mad dash of students eager to embrace their freedom. Charlotte, ever so mindful of this, wanted to make sure Angelique was prepared for the onslaught of angry squirrels that awaited. Karl, trying to calm his racing heart, watched intently. The pieces were moving into place, but would the universe give him that much desired nudge? Even though Angelique had wanted to attend public school, she was excited for the day to be finished. She wanted to tell her parents all about it. After the counselor left, Angelique entered the class and spoke with the teacher about why she was late. She had been briefed on the tardiness policy and wanted to follow the rules to the best of her ability. Her teacher had already seen that Angelique was with the counselor and just directed her to have a seat. As Angelique's gaze swept the room in search of an empty seat, Karl's breath caught in his throat. He watched as recognition flickered in her eyes when she spotted the seat near him. With a graceful motion, she moved towards it, her path seeming to slow time for Karl. Every step she took seemed to amplify his heartbeat, echoing in his ears. She placed her books down with a gentle thud, a subtle announcement of her presence. As she settled into the chair, Karl was overwhelmed by anxiety. The mysterious girl from the woods, the dancer of his dreams, was now seated just inches away from him. He took a deep breath, trying to find his voice, to say something, anything, that would bridge the silent space between them. The universe had presented the opportunity. Now it was up to him to seize it. Then came the unmistakable sound of a pencil rolling on the floor. Angelique's eyes widened as she realized what had happened. Her hand had inadvertently collided with Karl's as he had reached down to retrieve her fallen pencil. Their fingers brushed against each other, sending an electric jolt between the two. Karl, recovering first, cleared his throat and managed a bashful smile, holding up the retrieved pencil as a peace offering. "Dropped this," he mumbled, his cheeks warming with a rosy hue. Angelique, equally flustered but grateful, replied with a soft, "Thank you," her eyes twinkling with curiosity. The incident, simple as it was, had inadvertently broken the ice between them as she reached to retrieve her pencil. "Ouch!" Karl screeched. The realization hit Angelique like a ton of bricks. Her hasty turn had inadvertently driven the sharp point of her pencil into Karl's hand. The whimsical design of the pencil, white with delicate pink hearts, was in stark contrast to the situation at hand. Karl, trying to mask the pain, took a sharp intake of breath as he carefully extracted the pencil from his hand. The lack of lead at its tip signified how deep it had embedded into his skin. "I'm so sorry, Karl," Angelique stammered, her face flushed with concern and embarrassment. She reached out, gently taking his hand to inspect the puncture. "I didn't mean to." Karl, though wincing from the sting, managed a weak smile. "It's okay, Angelique. Just a sharp introduction, I guess?" As the teacher hurried over to Karl with a box of tissues, he briefly caught sight of the dark puncture in the center of his palm. But before he could fully process it, the small abyss was swallowed by a growing stain of red. The teacher, recognizing the emergency, quickly pressed tissues against the wound, staunching the flow. Moments later, Karl found himself being escorted to the nurse's office. Nurse Janet, with her practiced efficiency, gently cleaned and examined Karl's hand, ensuring no lead was embedded and that all was in working order. She then applied an antibacterial ointment, securing it with a bandage. While the physical discomfort was bearable, Karl's dismay grew when he realized he wouldn't be joining his peers on the bus ride home. The injury wasn't severe enough to warrant a hospital visit, but it certainly merited a call to his parents. From the nurse's office, Karl watched wistfully as his classmates clambered onto the buses. As they pulled away, he spotted his father's familiar car approaching. Eugen entered the office, and after a brief discussion with Nurse Janet about the pencil passing incident involving Angelique, he turned to his son. "Ready to go home, son?" Eugen inquired, his words carrying the gentle lilt of his German heritage. "Yes, father," Karl murmured, his voice heavy with disappointment, his gaze fixed on the ground. Eugen, noting his son's unusually despondent demeanor, felt a twinge of worry. "Come on, son," he encouraged gently. "We can chat during the drive." As they walked to the truck, it was evident to Eugen that Karl was grappling with something. He had a hunch about what it might be. Karl, typically animated and talkative, was quiet, cradling his injured hand close to his chest. Eugen had hoped that Karl would open up on his own, but as the miles rolled by in silence, he felt the need to initiate. Casting a sidelong glance at his son, he gently probed, "Ready to talk about it?" Karl shook his head, whispering, "No." Undeterred, Eugen continued, "Could you answer just one question for me?" Karl gave a slight nod in response. "Is Angelique the girl from the house next door?" Eugen inquired. Karl's sharp intake of breath and the fleeting look of surprise that crossed his face confirmed Eugen's suspicions. The mere mention of Angelique's name had unveiled the source of his son's distress. Karl took in a deep breath at the sound of Angelique's name and looked up and out the windshield. "Yes," Karl reluctantly replied. "Is she the reason you now have a hole in your hand?" his father asked with amusement. "Yes, but it wasn't her fault, it was mine. I was returning her pencil the wrong way. When she turned, it was bumped, and being very sharp, it went in my hand. I swear, Dad, it was an accident. She had not—" Karl's father interrupted him, sensing his son would keep ruminating on the incident throughout their journey. "That clears things up," Eugen remarked with a knowing smile. Baffled, Karl questioned, "What clears things up?" Eugen glanced at his son, a twinkle in his eye, and simply said, "Women." He paused, reflecting on his own past experiences before adding, "No matter how formidable, resilient, or unyielding a man may be, women have the power to elevate him to unimaginable pinnacles or bring him down to humble depths." He sighed, then chuckled, "And yes, more often than not, they inadvertently lead us into making complete fools of ourselves." "Son," Karl's father began, his voice tinged with nostalgia, recalling the butterflies of young love. "Your Opa," the affectionate term Karl used for his grandfather, once shared wisdom with me that his father had imparted during the tumultuous times of the war. He said, "Attack!" Karl flinched slightly, caught off guard by the intensity and volume with which his father uttered that word. But in that moment, he grasped the gravity of the advice. "Son, what Opa meant was this. When life presents challenges, obstacles, or fears, confront them head-on. Without the courage stemming from that advice, you might not be here today," Karl's father explained, his eyes gleaming with a reverence for the past and hope for the future. The following morning, Karl stood at the edge of his driveway, his hand bandaged, waiting for the bus. His mind full of indecision, part of him wanted to sit next to Angelique, engage in conversation, and clear the air. Another voice urged him to walk past her, ignoring the previous day's incident. The internal debate was intense and consuming. The distant rumble of the approaching bus grew louder, making its presence felt both by sound and sight from his vantage point. Karl's heart raced, mirroring the panic that welled up inside him. As he paced anxiously, his mind was a carousel of conflicting emotions. Time, however, was not on his side. The bus came to a halt right in front of him, its doors opening to reveal the inquisitive face of the driver, surprised to see Karl just standing there rather than his usual dash. It was then that his father's advice filled his thoughts, urging him to attack. Gaining strength from this memory, Karl began to advance. With each step, his courage grew, and before he realized, he found himself standing beside Angelique's seat. Her expression was one of genuine concern. "Karl, how's your hand? I never meant for that to happen, and I hope you know that," Angelique said, her voice filled with warmth and sincerity. Shaking off his nervousness, Karl replied, "It's all right, just a minor scratch. I should have been more careful too." With a newfound confidence, Karl took the seat next to Angelique, though he could feel a flurry of butterflies fluttering in his stomach. Words seemed to escape him, leaving a brief silence hanging in the air. "So, what do you like to do after school?" Angelique inquired, her question effortlessly breaking the tension. Grateful for the reprieve, Karl eased into the conversation. They chatted animatedly, their words flowing freely until they reached school. As they talked, Karl couldn't help but reflect on the silver linings from the day before, the inadvertent wound in his hand and his Opa's invaluable advice. From that day on, Karl and Angelique were practically inseparable. As the days turned into months, Karl's transformation was evident. Gone was the timid boy, replaced by a confident young man with a renewed sense of self. However, fate had other plans. While their bond grew stronger, it was destined to be tested. The following summer, driven by the need to be closer to his ailing grandfather, Karl's family decided to relocate hundreds of miles away. With the move, Karl and Angelique's paths diverged, and they lost touch, their budding relationship becoming a memory of youth.